Hello, my name is Father Timothy Tighe, and I thank you so much for joining us for our Overview 18 in our journey of faith in the light of the cross. We look up on our screen and we see the theme for this 18th overview. God inspired the J. Yawis, the first writer of the Bible, to study David's history and write the story of original sin and its effects on family. J. abstracted the essence of David's sin and constructed the Adam and Eve story for a universal family level. We go on to our next screen and we continue to read. After Adam and Eve sin, the J writer reminds us of God's mercy for sinful humans, especially David, who need mercy in a world of disordered minds and hearts. Genesis 3:21, Yahweh made clothing for Adam and Eve so they could cope with this disordered world. But then he said, the man thinks he is one of us knowing good and bad, so he must not eat any more fruit from the garden. Adam and Eve ate the fruit of knowledge to be free of God's control. But free from God, they lost control. They felt shamed and naked. Their opened eyes saw creation as a collection of pieces, all fragmented, no longer as one. We go on to our next screen and we continue reading. So God banished him from the garden. But did God banish man, or did he simply feel banished? Free of God, Adam and Eve's eyes could not see a safe, ordered garden, but only a disordered wilderness. But it was the same property. God stationed cherubim and a revolving fiery sword to guard the tree of life. When Adam and Eve tried to make sense of the pieces of the world, it was like fighting an angel with a fiery revolving sword, confusing their brains. And we ask, did the J writer feel this way as he tried to write? And do all people who study Bible feel this way, including us? We go on to our next screen and we continue reading. David and Bathsheba's sin models Adam and Eve's sin. 2 Samuel 11, when kings go to war, David stayed in Jerusalem. From his roof he saw a beautiful lady bathing. He was told she is Bathsheba, wife of Uriah the Hittite, a non-Judean. David took her and knew her. She conceived and sent word to him, I am with child. So David ordered Uriah sent home to spend time with his wife. But Uriah said, can I go home to my wife while your troops are camped out in fields? We go on to our next screen and we continue. So Uriah would not go home. He was too honorable. Jay sees the Gentile Uriah as more honorable than King David. So David wrote to Joab, place Uriah where the fighting is fierce, then pull back and let him be struck down dead. And thus Uriah died. 12:1, so the Lord sent Nathan to David. He said, judge this case. A rich man had large herds. A poor man had only one ewe lamb, which grew up with his children and shared their food. We go on to our next screen and we continue. The rich man had a guest. Instead of cooking a lamb from his own large flock, he cooked the poor man's only ewe. David said, as God lives, this man should die. You are that man, Nathan said. Yahweh says, I anointed you king of Israel and rescued you from Saul. I gave you his wives and the house of Israel and Judah. Why did you spurn your God and kill Uriah? The sword shall never leave your house. We go on to our next screen and we continue to read. For you despised me by taking Uriah's wife. I will bring evil on you out of your own house. For you will see your neighbor lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did this in secret, but I, Yahweh, will do this in broad daylight. David said, I have sinned against Yahweh. And Nathan said, Yahweh forgives you, David, but you turned against your God so completely that this child will die. This was the first child. Solomon was second and was born later on. We go on to the next screen and we continue to read. Uriah also inspired the teaching of monogamy in the creation story. So we have to go back before sin, and we read in Genesis 2:24, thus a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two become one flesh. Verse 25, man and wife were naked, but felt no shame before sin. It is strange that Jay could write this teaching in 950 AD when both David and Solomon had many wives. Jay wrote that monogamy was God's original intent until sin brought shame to marriage. Jay also saw that David and Solomon's many wives caused destructive shame to Israel. We go on to our next screen and we continue to read. David's sin was handed down to his firstborn Amnon, who fell in love with Tamar, his half-sister and the full sister of Absalom, David's second-born. Amnon acts sick and asked David to send Tamar to feed him. 2 Samuel 13. But when Tamar brought Amnon food, he said, sister, come lie with me. But she said, no, my brother, do not shame me with this intolerable crime. Where could I take my shame? Jay teaches that shame is the power of sin. We go on to our next screen. For shame breaks down love and life-giving oneness. So 2 Samuel 13, Amnon ignored Tamar and shamed her. Amnon then felt an intense hatred that far surpassed the love he previously had for her. Get out, he said. No, brother, this second wound is far worse than the first wound, she said. Shame can easily turn love to hatred. Verse 20 later, Absalom saw Tamar crying and said, has Amnon been with you? He is your brother. Calm down. But Tamar grieved and felt shamed and abandoned. We go on to our next screen and we continue to read. Second teaching, all children are born in shame and sin. Tamar says the wounds inflicted are incurable. Thus, baptism is essential, for believers are graced by it into oneness with Jesus, to wondrously love through the shame of sin and redeem the incurable wounds of sin. God the Father does not heal incurable wounds, but wondrously redeems them into life-giving blessings. So God took the curse of the cross and redeemed it into a blessing. Now David heard what happened, but favored his firstborn so much he did nothing like many bishops do. So we go on to our next screen. 2 years later, Absalom invited the princes to a banquet. He also invited David and said, but if the king cannot come, please send Amnon. David asked why. He was suspicious, but finally relented and sent Amnon. Absalom told his servants, when Amnon is full of wine and I say kill him, do it. They did it. David was told Amnon is dead and Absalom has taken flight. We go on to our next screen and we read, Adam and Eve ate the fruit of knowledge and thus lost control. They passed this darkness down to their seed. They lost control of their minds. So the Cain and Abel story is modeled on the darkness Amnon and Absalom received from David. Genesis 4:1, the man knew his wife, and she bore Cain. Next, Eve bore Abel, a shepherd of flocks, while Cain was a farmer tilling the soil. Hebrews from Egypt were shepherds, like Moses. But Israelites who settled earlier in Canaan became farmers who were seduced by the fertility cults, thus destroying Israel. We go on to our next screen. Verse 4:3, so Cain offered fruit of the earth to Yahweh. Abel offered the best firstling from his flock. Yahweh looked with favor on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. Cain resented this. Yahweh said, "Why so resentful, Cain? Sin is a demon lurking at your door, yet you can master him." But Cain said to Abel, "Let's go out in the field." And once out there, Cain killed him. Yahweh asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" We go on to our next screen and we continue. Just as Absalom was filled with a fiery anger that led him to kill Amnon, so Cain was filled with a fiery resentment that led him to kill Abel. Farmers imagined Mother Earth favored other farmers who had better crops. They also imagined Mother Earth coupled in sexual ecstasy with Yahweh the Father God. So farmers gave rich offerings to enter divine sexual ecstasy through temple porne women and win favoritism. Even today, angry, fiery minds still resent God and imagine him playing favorites. Like Cain, they ask, "Why don't you bless me like you bless others?" We go on to our next screen and we continue reading. Yahweh said, "You are banned from the soil." And Cain said, "Since you banished me, I must avoid your presence and wander the earth. Thus to him I am a poor, wayfaring stranger." But why do we feel like wayfarers? Jay explains the human tendency to push away God's presence. "I don't need you now, God." To minimize feelings of guilt and shame. But then later on, when we need him, "Where are you, God?" 2 Samuel 14, after years, David allowed Absalom to return. But Absalom, anxious to be king, organized a revolt. Feeling betrayed, David wept as he passed through the Kidron Valley by the Mount of Olives, just as Jesus will do 1,000 years later. We go on to our next screen and we read 16:15. Absalom entered Jerusalem. He was told to visit David's concubines left in the palace to take care of it. When Israel hears of your contempt for your father, all will take courage. So Absalom visited his father's concubines on the palace roof in the view of all of Israel. Thus Nathan's words are fulfilled on the same palace roof where David first saw Bathsheba. David's guilt and shame turned his mind upside down. David told Joab, "Be gentle with young Absalom." Gentle with this creep who's trying to kill him. David's army under Joab defeated Israel. We go on to our next screen and we read, Absalom fled, but his hair got caught on a tree. Joab thrust a pike into his heart. When David heard Absalom was dead, he cried out, "Absalom, my son Absalom, would that I had died instead of you." His guilt was overwhelming him. His soldiers heard this and felt ashamed that they fought for him. Joab said, "You shame your troops. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. Get out of your bed, David, and thank your servants." David repented, and clothed in God's mercy, he regained his sanity and thanked his troops. We go on to our next screen and we read, God inspired the J. Yahwist to study David's history and write the story of original sin and its effects on family. J. abstracted the essence of David's sin and constructed Adam and Eve's story for a universal family level. Thank you so much for joining us in this journey of faith in the light of the cross. I hope you join us and continue to join us again.